This is my final ecosystem report on Green Lane Park in Green Lane, Pennsylvania. I visited the park between March 6th and April 14th, 2016. As you can see from the map, Green Lane Park is quite large. My visits only touched a small area of the park. Each week I walked about 1.5 miles round trip, not counting offshoot trips off of the path. Here is a closer view of my path. Each week I parked by Deep Creek Lake. I walked down to the lake and then walked to the amphitheater, and from there I got on the Perkiomen Trail and walked to the point behind the storage buildings, which I refer to as the dumping grounds. As you can see, I took some short trips off of the trail at times as well. Next, I will show you some of the specific areas of the park where I walked. You pass this area as you enter into the park. I took this image on week 2. The first week, there had been a sign that said ice skating rink. Later, a volleyball net was put up and additional sand was added where you can already see some sand on the right-hand side. This image was taken week 1. Note the snow remaining, which was likely plowed there when the parking lot was cleared. From left to right, you can see the playground, the amphitheater in the distance, and a picnic pavilion to your right. This is an image of Deep Creek Lake on week 1. Later in the presentation, I will show you additional images of the lake throughout the weeks. This image shows Night Lake on the left and Deep Creek Lake on the right. The two are separated by a dam and spillway, which will be viewed on the next slide. This is a view of the dam and spillway that separates Night Lake from Deep Creek Lake. This is viewed from Night Lake, so the water from Deep Creek Lake flows into Night Lake. This is the roadway from the amphitheater to the Perkiomen Trail. This image was taken week 1, and again you will see it later in the presentation as I highlight the changes that occurred over the weeks. This is a view of Night Lake. As you can see, there are some logs lodged in the middle, so it must be shallow there. And geese and other waterfowl congregate around these logs. Additionally, take note of the color of the water. It is very murky brown. This is where I started out on the Perkiomen Trail. These are some additional images of the Perkiomen Trail. The image on the left was taken week 1 when everything was dead, brown, and dreary. The image on the right is from week 5 when things were finally starting to turn green. This is an image of the trestle bridge that crosses over Night Lake. It was taken week 1, and again note the murky brown color and how dead and dreary everything looks. At the beginning of this project, I listed the changes I expected to see over the coming weeks. Because I picked up so much litter on my first visit, I expected to see less trash each visit. I also expected to see the snow continue to melt until it was gone completely. I hoped that I would see the trees start to bud and maybe even get leaves, and that I would see more green instead of gray and brown. I also hoped to have more animal sightings, and I thought that I might see the water lose its murky brown color. The only one I didn't express, but did expect, was a steady rise in temperature each week. As I stated before, I expected to see a steady rise in temperature over the weeks. While the temperature did rise the first few weeks, it later fell to almost where it had started. I experienced various types of weather, from partly cloudy to overcast and raining, and from warm sunny days to cold windy ones. In between some of my visits, we even experienced more snow. On my first week, I really took the time to get to know the park so that I could observe the changes over the upcoming weeks. There was still some snow along the edge of the parking lots where it had been plowed. The soil was moist and I was able to leave footprints behind in the bare patches. The trees and shrubbery were mostly bare and did not seem to have any buds on them yet. I found some sort of fungus that seemed to have fallen off of a tree and some thick black and brown nutshells and acorns. I found animal feces from goose and deer in the field. I also found a piece of hide with tissue attached, which appeared to be from a deer. As I walked the trail, I found bags of dog poop. I had seen the dew in other areas and was annoyed that people did not clean up after their dogs. Bags are supplied by the park, and to me, Bagging and leaving was 100 times worse than just leaving the excrement to decompose. As I walked down the trail, I found two additional scraps of animal hide. It was black fur with brown tips. I would assume some sort of rodent or a small animal, and perhaps these were the remnants of a bird of prey's meal. I also noticed that some areas of the water had some frothy foam in it. I wasn't sure if this was natural or if it was some sort of contamination. About where I wanted to turn around anyway, I found a whole lot of litter dumped over a bank. There are a few county outbuildings across the trail from it, so I think perhaps it's from employees. Many were Snapple bottles, so I think it may be one offender repeatedly chucking things over the bank while on break. I also found several metal containers. I was upset because it was too much for me to take. While the primary focus of my project is on my main visits to the park, I did have a few short visits to take pictures for a time lapse. One of the images I took week one was of a plant with snow behind it. I stopped during the week to get a second picture with the snow in the background. Temperatures were near 80 during the week, so I was lucky to be able to capture the last of the snow. I saw that the plants were getting taller and the flowers had some buds on Friday. Today I could see yellow in one of them, so I assume it is a yellow daffodil. The weather was cloudy and it rained off and on while we were there. Some of the changes I saw were due to human activity. They are listed here. However, the majority of the other changes were due to nature taking its course, particularly as we move into spring. As of today, there was not a trace of snow left in any of the 3 spots it had been last week. I saw more bugs today, mainly mosquitoes and water bugs, and a few spiders, which I suspect was due to the damp weather. The water level at the lake appears to be a little bit lower this week, maybe half an inch to an inch. There was no foam in the water where I had noticed it last week. Last week I did not see many trees with any buds. This week some had buds and some of the buds were even starting to open. One shrub by the lake had these long tendrils on it that weren't there last week. You'll see more images of that later. I also saw 2 clumps of daffodils that were in full bloom. Prior to my week 3 visit, it had been raining a lot, so one of the first things I noticed was that the ground was muddy and downright marshy in spots. This water must have been good for the grass because I saw fresh grass growing in spots. I also noticed that the grass near Deep Creek Lake was swept towards the lake, which makes me think it could have flooded recently. I hadn't noticed this on my prior visits. I also noticed the sound of the water going over the spillway between Deep Creek Lake and Night Lake for the first time. I was happy to see there was a lot less trash. When I visited my daffodils, they still hadn't bloomed, but one bud had lost its outer layer and the other is starting to expand. I also have a tree branch that I've been doing time-lapse photos of each week, and the buds on that continue to open a bit more with each visit. I also saw a greater variety of birds this week. When I arrived on week 4, it was mostly cloudy with some wind. We had had some torrential downpours the day before and rain the morning of, but thankfully it cleared up for my visit. I made a quick pit stop last week to take a picture of my daffodils, and I'm so glad that I did because the 2 buds were in full bloom. This week, however, the one was already gone and the other was shriveled up. I did notice the plant was much taller though. I also saw there was a volleyball net and sand in the ice rink. The newly planted trees were now flowering, and I saw that there were many fishermen around and on the lake. I also saw several types of wildflowers along the trail. It seemed like the ground cover was encroaching on the trail a bit. The trail is made of gravel and it seemed like it was a little bit narrower this week. I also saw that the prickers were growing leaves, as were some of the lower shrub-like plants, but I still did not notice buds on the mature trees yet, which surprised me as I've seen them in other areas. It was also extremely buggy this week. I saw what I believed was a red-tailed hawk based on its shape, size, and brown coloring, but I wasn't able to get close enough to try and get a picture. I also found a snail on one of the pieces of trash I picked up. I didn't realize it was alive until I got home and saw him slithering along the inside of my trash bag. He was kind of fascinating to watch. When I arrived at the park this week, it was rather chilly at just 46 degrees Fahrenheit, and with 11-mile-per-hour winds, it felt even colder. According to my weather app, it felt like it was 41 degrees. I saw that the flowers on the trees by the parking lot were more open this week, and the grass was taller as well. In particular, I noticed a lot of tall onion grass in the one field. I saw that Deep Creek Lake had some algae in it, and the one plant by the lake that I'm trying to identify, the one that had the long tendril-like flower seed pods, had some buds on it this week. I cleaned up the last of the small items I saw at the dumping grounds, minus one jar whose contents were questionable. Unfortunately, I was not able to spend much time at the park on week 6 because of everything else I had going on. This was a shame because it was sunny and warm when I visited, so it would have been the perfect day for a walk around the park. I also changed things up a bit because I needed to visit the park office, which is on the other side of the lakes. Unfortunately, by the time I was able to get there, the office was closed. I had been hoping to find some information that could help me identify the plants and animals I had seen, but I had no such luck. While I was on that side of the lake, I realized I had been there before for a festival. It's funny how I didn't recognize it from the other side. I also saw tulips and weeping cherry willows in bloom, and I saw my first squirrel in all of my visits. This was very surprising to me that I hadn't seen one yet. I also saw a woodpecker. As I mentioned before, one of the things I tried to do each week was capture images that would reflect the changes of the park to create a kind of time lapse. This is Deep Creek Lake on week 1. You can see on the right-hand side there is a small sign that says danger, keep off ice. This was removed sometime before my next visit. This is Deep Creek Lake on week 2. Notice the sign is gone. In addition, you can also start to see the changes in weather. This week you can see the ripples of the rain on the lake. This is Deep Creek Lake on week 3. You can see the grass is just starting to get a little bit green. This is Deep Creek Lake on week 4, and as you can see, several fishermen have come out to enjoy the beautiful sunny weather. You can also see the grass is much greener this week, and you can also notice that there's something floating in the water along the shoreline. Finally, we have Deep Creek Lake on week 5. There was not much change other than the grass again being a little bit greener. On week 2, I noticed some sort of oil spill on Deep Creek Lake. Thankfully, it was only a small spot. In the same spot on week 4, I saw something floating along the shoreline. It seems to be some sort of dirt or pollen. Again in the same spot, but on week 5, I noticed there was algae growing in the water. This is the roadway from the amphitheater to the Perkiomen Trail on week 1. As you can see, everything is pretty dead, and there is a lot of brown. We can see such a difference in just a few weeks. Here we are at the same location on week 5. The grass is so much greener and growing tall. It's hard to see, but in the distance, to the left of the rock pile, there's a white dot. This is actually some birdhouses that the park has put in. Also difficult to see, behind the brush on the right-hand side, is a tree peeking up that has some white blooms on it. This is an image of the trestle bridge that crosses over Night Lake. It was taken week 1, and again note the murky brown color and how dead and dreary everything looks. And again, by week 5, things are coming to life and we are starting to see green. The water also looks much clearer. However, I believe some of that is because of the bright sky reflecting. On days where it was more overcast, it did still seem to have a brown murkiness to it. Over the next few slides, you will see how these short little daffodils come to life and become taller than that mound of snow, which eventually melts away to nothing. Unfortunately, the daffodil plant I picked had a short life. While others stayed in bloom, this one lost its two blooms quite quickly. However, I'm very thankful to have gotten to capture the plant growing while the snow melted away. In the same type of progression, over the next few slides, you will see how this tree planted by the parking lot comes into bloom. I took the image on the left on my week 1 visit because I was unsure if this was some sort of animal track, perhaps a burrow hole, or just someone walking along with a stick and poking the ground. It wasn't until week 4 that I saw how much that little hole had changed. You can even see some weeds growing up along with the green grass. Unfortunately, many of the plants which I captured images for, I had a hard time identifying. I did see ferns, sycamore trees, white oak, which were fresh plantings by the park, hickory nut trees, thistle, dandelions, daffodils, blutes, Virginia bluebells, tulips, and weeping cherry willows. I was unable to identify the specific type of fern that this is. However, it was my first green plant that I spotted on week 1. These are some other plants which I saw on week 1 and was unable to identify. If you notice in the top right corner of the leftmost image, there is a soda bottle in the background. This is just an example of how much litter there was. In the image on the left, you can see that the fresh grass is just beginning to sprout out of the mud. This was on week 3. And on the right-hand side, you can see a clump of onion grass, which is almost a foot tall. Next, we will look at some of the trees around the park. On the left, we see a Norway spruce, and on the right, we see a juniper tree. Here we see the leaves of a white oak still attached to one of the fresh plantings in the park. Here are some images of American beech trees, which I was able to identify by the leaves still on them. I mentioned in week 1 that I saw some fungus that seemed to have fallen from a tree. I continued to see this in my visits, and some research told me that these are called tree lichens. It is a symbiotic relationship between two organisms, fungus and algae. The fungus grows on the tree and can collect moisture, which the algae needs. The algae, in return, can create food from the energy of the sun, which feeds the fungus. The large white-barked tree in the distance is a sycamore tree. On the right-hand side, the bottom image shows the seed pods as they are on the tree, and the upper image shows the seeds as they have been released from the pod. On my first visit, I saw a lot of nutshells that were thick and black, and I wasn't sure what type of nut they were. It wasn't until later that I actually found some of the nuts and was able to determine that it is from a hickory nut tree. Unfortunately, the identity of this shrub remains a mystery to me. Someone suggested perhaps a Corylus americana, while someone else thought perhaps an Alnus glutinosa. I also found something online that said it could be a speckled alder, which is my first guess, but when I broke open one of the twigs, it did not have the markings inside that the person suggested it should have. Next, we will take a look at some of the flowers I saw in the park. Here we see thistle, violets, and a dandelion. These are some unidentified ground cover wildflowers along the path. I was also unable to identify these small purple flowers, which were also a ground covering. These are also some unidentified seed pods that I saw. The images on the left were taken during my week 4 visit of this lone white wildflower. By week 5, some additional white flowers had popped up, but I'm unsure if they are the same type of flower as they look different to me. I was unable to identify it. Also on week 4, I found these yellow wildflowers growing up through the rocks of the path. These small, purpley blue flowers with yellow centers are called blutes. I was so excited when I found these pink and blue bell-shaped flowers along the trail. I was worried that I would not be able to identify them, but I was quickly able to discover that they are known as Virginia bluebells. I saw many more species of animals at the park than I expected to. Waterfowl included geese, male and female mallard ducks, and double-crested cormorants. There were other waterfowl on the lakes, however, I was unable to identify them due to their distance. I also saw seagulls, robins, crows, blackbirds, small brown-striped birds that I believe are a type of sparrow, a chickadee, and a woodpecker. I also saw a male and female cardinal, and it was my first time seeing a female cardinal. I had also never seen bluebirds before, and I saw several. Also new was a tufted titmouse. Each week, there were always several birds of prey circling overhead. I was unable to identify them. I also think I may have seen a bald eagle and a red-tailed hawk. On occasion, I also saw fish jumping out of the lake. I found a snail. I spotted a beaver. And surprisingly, it wasn't until week 6 that I saw one lone squirrel. I also saw deer, however, the one that was in the park unfortunately was dead, and the others that I saw were just outside the park as I was leaving. I mentioned that on my week 1 visit, I found fur with tissue attached that I believed was from a deer. I was not sure how it got there until week 2 when the carcass was found. In the image on the left, you can see the carcass during my week 2 visit, and on week 5, you can see how much the scene has changed with the grass growing up through the bones. I was unable to identify what type of animal this hide came from, which I found on my week 1 visit. Here are some images of geese from the park. You can notice in the top left image that the leftmost goose has an ankle bracelet as an identifier. There is a red arrow pointing to it. Here's an image of the beaver my husband spotted swimming in Night Lake. It took much patience to get this image, but I had never seen this type of bird before. I was later able to identify it as a tufted titmouse. Here is a video of the double-crested cormorants on Night Lake. Here is a video of the snail who traveled home with me in my trash bag. After watching him for a bit, I released him into my backyard. As I mentioned, there were several birds of prey I was unable to identify. On the left may have been a bald eagle due to its brown color and white head. The ones on the right were circling each week, and I believe they may have been some sort of vulture or hawk. Here we see male and female mallard ducks swimming on Night Lake. If you note, in the top left corner in the upper left image, there is actually a bobber hanging from the tree. Just another example of litter in the park. I also spotted some insects in the park. On one trip, I saw a few spiders, one of which is this brown spider here, which I believe may be a wolf spider. I also saw mosquitoes and water bugs. Additionally, when I was taking pictures of the hickory nuts, I noticed that the rock appeared to be moving. Here it was covered in these little black bugs. I was unable to identify what they are though. As I mentioned, on my first visit, I found what I refer to as the dumping grounds, where a lot of litter was dumped in one spot. In this top image, in the red circles, you can see just what is visible. There was way more litter there than what you can see because some of it was covered with leaves. I collected litter from the park for 5 of my 6 weeks, and I was so proud of the amount of trash that I was able to remove from the park. Unfortunately, not everything was able to be removed because some of the items I did not feel were safe to take, given that I did not have protective gloves on. Examples of things that I saw were bottles, both plastic and glass, a spray paint can, a light bulb from a floodlight, a tin can, several types of food packages, fishing line, several bottle caps, Christmas lights, a used condom, tissues and paper towels, plastic bags, some of which had dog poo in them, and dozens of cigarette butts. Now let's take a look at the changes I had expected to see at the beginning of this project. Because I was picking up litter, I expected to see less trash each week, and yes, I did. And picking up less litter within the park allowed me to pick up more from the dumping ground, so that I was able to clean it almost completely out. The snow did continue to melt and disappeared completely, and while the trees started to bud, they did not do so as much as I expected, and none of them got leaves. I did see more green as things started to grow, but the majority of this was grass and ground covering, and not the trees or shrubs. I did see many more animal sightings, and it was so much fun to try and identify them, even if I wasn't able to. The water did appear to lose some of its murky brown color, but not as much as I expected. And the temperature fluctuated more than I expected. I expected a steady rise each week. While I intended to stop at my site on the way home from work each week, I only managed to do so a few times. Because of this, I made several trips out of the way to the park, and thus I felt bad for making more of a carbon footprint. I felt like this offset some of the good work I did by cleaning up litter. When I went to the park office, I realized that I've been to the park before for a festival. It's funny that having been visiting the site for weeks, I didn't recognize it until I was on the other side of the lake, looking at it from a different perspective. I noticed that cigarette butts were the one form of litter that repeatedly reappeared each week. One thing I determined is that I need to find my binoculars and keep them in my car so that when I do go out to the park or any other park in the future, I will be better able to identify birds and other animals that are too far away. While I wish I had brought my actual camera instead of just my cell phone, I felt I was better able to enjoy my time at the park in order to relax and make observations. I am so proud of myself that I was able to clean up a large amount of the trash that was dumped behind the outbuildings. All that is left is some larger pieces that are too large for me to carry out. And finally, I really enjoyed my time at the park each week, and I genuinely got excited when I would spot a new species of plant or animal. I hope to find more time in the future to spend in nature. Perhaps I will find that time when I'm done school. It was both relaxing and a good form of exercise.